What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be going through my top 24 quarterback rankings for the 2025 fantasy football season. Yesterday, I posted my top 60 running backs and wide receivers. This video will be the quarterbacks. Later on today, I'll have the tight ends. And then tomorrow, I think I'll run through like my top 100 overall rankings. If you guys want my full top 200, it's free for you guys. Google Sheet will be linked in the description. You can download it, draft off of it if you would like. But let's just dive right into the quarterback position. More of a quick hitter video, not going crazy in depth on every player. Now in tier one, I have two quarterbacks, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson. I do think these guys have kind of separated themselves as the top two quarterbacks. Pretty much all offseason, I had been Lamar over Allen. Recently did a video kind of breaking down some of the Vegas projections, the betting lines, and Josh Allen did kind of clearly come out as the quarterback one. So I made that switch, but in my overall rankings, I still have these guys back to back. Just, move Josh Allen to my quarterback one spot. Then in tier two, also two quarterbacks, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels, both guys that also have a lot of rushing upside. Daniels more from like a rushing volume perspective. Jalen Hurts just based on the fact that he's going to be hitting double-digit touchdowns as long as he stays healthy. Guys that I feel comfortable taking in round three. Then looking at tier three, Joe Burrow has always kind of been in this tier where he's going to have super impressive passing production. He just doesn't quite have the rushing upside to fully launch himself like into the top four with the Josh Allen, Lamar Jacksons, Jalen Hurts, and Jaden Daniels of the world. But I also recently bumped up Patrick Mahomes. Now, Mahomes has been pretty underwhelming in back-to-back seasons. And if I really wanted to like nitpick this, I could have Burrow and then like Mahomes a mini tier behind him. But to avoid having a million tiers here, I did put them together. It does just feel like this is going to be the bounce back year for Patrick Mahomes. Him and this Chiefs offense were just firing on all cylinders in his first few seasons in the NFL. Last two, they've just been very close to league average. I do think they could get back to being one of the best offenses in the league. And we know Patrick Mahomes does have the upside to finish as the QB1 overall. So I'm going to have him in the same tier with Joe Burrow. Then looking at tier four, I have Kyler Murray, Baker Mayfield, Bo Nix. Three different quarterbacks. I am still kind of in on Kyler Murray. He's been underwhelming over the last couple of seasons, but he's a quarterback who does have that rushing upside. I like his weapons with Trey McBride. You have Marvin Harrison Jr. going into year two. And I do think it's interesting because a lot of people seem to be very in on Trey McBride. They're in on Marvin Harrison Jr. having a big bounce back or like taking a year two leap. But then Kyler seems to be the quarterback that's somewhat disrespected. If you have a tight end that you think is going to be top two in fantasy points and then a wide receiver who's going to be flirting with like fantasy wide receiver one status, the quarterback is probably going to be productive, and Kyler also has the upside with his legs, so I do like him leading this tier. Then I have Baker Mayfield. I am just coming around to him having a pretty high floor due to his passing production, even though, the Chris Godwin injury, the Jalen McMillan injury, those guys aren't going to be ready week one most likely. He still has solid weapons with Mike Evans. You have Emeka Egbuka, who I'm very high on. He's coming off a career year. I think he's going to be solid once again in 2025. I'm probably still a little bit lower on him than consensus and like my overall player rankings, but at the quarterback position, he is my quarterback 8. And then I have Bo Nix, just really strong rookie season. Even more impressive, like after the first few games of the season, once he really settled in, has some rushing upside, does have improved weapons, not like a crazy, cast around him, but you have RJ Harvey, who's a weapon out of the backfield. They added Evan Ingram. You have some young wide receivers, Marvin Mims, Troy Franklin, guys who could all take leaps heading into the 2025 season. And then moving into tier 5, I have 4 guys in this tier. It is going to be Justin Fields, Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, and Caleb Williams. For Justin Fields, I've cooled off of him a little bit, but I'm still very in on him, like at his current consensus ADP. We just know he carries a ton of rushing upside. Even last year with the Steelers, he was very startable in the games where he was the starting quarterback. And so even without, strong supporting weapons, play calling that was super passive, Justin Fields was still a very solid fantasy quarterback. I think what kind of separates him from these other guys in potentially a negative way is like I have no concerns that Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott, Caleb Williams aren't going to be the starters for the entire season. There's no guarantee that Justin Fields fully holds on to this starting spot. I'm a Bears fan. I really like Justin Fields. I hope he does hold on to it, but we also have to acknowledge he's not some sort of world beater at quarterback. You're drafting him for fantasy, not for his real life production, but for the rushing upside and how much that rushing does help you for fantasy. So as long as he is the starter, I think he's going to be productive. I think he's going to be a solid starting option. but he just doesn't have the same security as some of these other quarterbacks. Brock Purdy, I think, is really solid. I think this offense has the potential to have a real bounce back. The wide receiver room is still kind of up in the air with like Jawan Jennings banged up. Ricky Pearsall, not quite sure, what type of player he's going to be. Brandon Ayuk's going to be returning in the middle of the season, but you have CMC out of the backfield. You have George Kittle, who's coming off a super impressive season. And even in a year where a lot of stuff went wrong around him, Brock Purdy was still a solid fantasy quarterback and showed kind of like a newfound rushing upside. So I do like Brock Purdy here as a top 12 quarterback. Then I have Dak Prescott. I'm just pretty high on this Cowboys passing attack. CeeDee Lamb is obviously a stud. I love the addition of George Pickens. I think he's going to have a really solid season. I think Dak continues to be one of the most slept on quarterbacks, both from a real life and fantasy perspective. And then the last guy in this tier is Caleb Williams. I think the Bears offense has a pretty wide range of outcomes where I like the supporting cast around Caleb Williams with DJ Moore, Rome Odunze, Luther Burden, Colston Loveland. I love the addition of Ben Johnson. And so I could totally see this offense having a total 180 and being one of the best units in the league in 2025. Also major upgrades to the offensive line. But there's also the risk that like Caleb Williams just doesn't take that leap and he ends up being a bust. Like I said, I'm a Bears fan. I don't want that to happen, but that certainly is in the range of outcomes. So I think this is kind of like a fair middle ground. Also a quarterback who I think gets slept on a little bit for his rushing upside. Fairly mobile. Think he's a guy who can give you 350, 400 rushing yards, 3, 4, 5 touchdowns, kind of in that range at the quarterback position. Then moving into tier 6, these are all guys who I'm very willing to draft. The way I've been looking at the quarterback position in fantasy this year is I'm in on the elite guys, right? Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Jane Daniels, Jalen Hurts. If I don't get one of those guys, unless there's like some sort of screaming value in the middle rounds, I'm typically just waiting and grabbing whatever late round guy kind of slips. So this is a tier I'm very comfortable with. I like Drake May leading this tier. He was productive as a rookie. I think he has some really nice rushing upside, improved weapons around him with Stephon Diggs coming in, the addition of Kyle Williams. I do think Drake May will be a solid fantasy option. Then I have Trevor Lawrence. I think probably the most slept on fantasy quarterback. He has really solid weapons with Brian Thomas Jr., Travis Hunter. You have the addition of Liam Cohen, who I'm super excited about. I'm just super in on this Jaguars offense, like altogether. Trevor Lawrence has rushing upside. Like I said, he has 2 stud wide receivers. I think it's weird that he's like consistently going after Herbert, McCarthy, Love, Goff. Like, I think he's firmly in that range and, in my opinion, even ahead of those guys. Next up at my quarterback 16 spot, this is going to be Justin Herbert. I just think from a real life perspective, Justin Herbert is a true top tier quarterback. Obviously, the weapons aren't amazing. The injury to Rashawn Slater really sucks, but he still has a decent supporting cast. This is a bet into the talent. Plus, I did think we saw like the Chargers try to get him a little bit more involved with his legs. He's one of those weird examples at quarterback where rushing production is more of a tendency than it just is like pure athleticism. Because if you were to look at Herbert's measurables, his ability as an athlete, you would think he would be like, a top tier rushing quarterback. It just hasn't really been his tendency, but I do think he has like a decent rushing floor, especially if he's not dealing with injuries, which has been an issue over the last few seasons. Then I'm going to go with JJ McCarthy. He's a really interesting guy to rank because when you just look at like the Vegas projections and, how they're viewing McCarthy, this offense, they're not really expecting McCarthy to come in and struggle, but we have to remember this is still like pretty much his rookie season, right? Missed the entire 2024 season with injury. And it's not like he was viewed as this slam dunk prospect, but on the other hand, he's in an amazing situation. Quarterback whisperer Kevin O'Connell, great weapons around him with Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, TJ Hawkinson. Plus, he is a very mobile quarterback, so he can at least give you something on the ground. Then I have Jordan Love, actually had a really strong start to the 2024 season. The fantasy production just kind of dipped once he started dealing with injuries. This is going to be a good offense. I think this is going to be a solid passing attack. Interesting group of weapons around him. With the Packers over the last few years, it's always been like you have a lot of guys in the mix, but there hasn't been one guy who's really stood out. I think the hope this year is that is Matthew Golden. I'm not the biggest fan of him as a prospect. I don't know how high his ceiling is, but I still think Jordan Love is a totally fine, like later round quarterback that I wouldn't hate, putting into my starting lineup in week 1. Then I have Jared Goff. This might seem low, and more likely than not, he is going to finish ahead of this on a point per game basis. He's going to give you solid passing production. You know that. He's going to be up there with his like passing yard line, his passing touchdown line. He's just going to give you absolutely nothing on the ground. And so as a late round quarterback, I think he's totally fine. He's someone you feel confident plugging into your lineup. There is just very minimal upside. So I'm not really trying to like reach and draft him at quarterback 11, quarterback 12, when I feel like that is pretty close to his peak. I'd rather take some swings on some of these more mobile guys who I do think have higher ceilings, but totally fine with Jared Goff as like a wait and take him, plug him into your lineup in week one. And then the final guy in this tier is CJ Stroud. I think the passing volume is going to be there. I think he's going to be towards the top of the league in passing yards, passing touchdowns. I like the weapons around him with Nico Collins, Jaden Higgins, Christian Kirk, Jalen Knoll. The offensive line is a concern, but I think they're going to handle it a little bit better than what they did last year. And then my final tier here, tier 7. These are guys that I don't love as my starting option. Maybe they're interesting plays in Superflex, probably guys that are going to be on the waiver wire. I have Bryce Young, Michael Penix, Tua, and then Matthew Stafford. For Bryce Young, he did turn a corner last year, got pretty involved as a runner using his legs. You also added Tedero McMillan, which I think is a big deal, like adding a legit number one weapon to this offense. Then I have Michael Penix, and I think he, could be someone who outperforms this. Obviously, there's still some uncertainty. We don't have a large sample size of him as the starting quarterback, but has some upside on an offense with some decent weapons. Drake London, Darnell Mooney, Kyle Pitts. Actually, one of these quarterbacks, kind of like a Justin Herbert, where he is very athletic. He just doesn't really have the tendency to take off and run. I think a lot of that is just due to all the injuries he suffered in college. So I think from an upside perspective, somewhat capped because he's not going to give you a ton of rushing production. But, young player, these are the type of bets that could definitely overachieve from where they're ranked. Then I have Tua. Doesn't feel like a super awesome pick, but like we have seen stretches where this offense is humming, especially early on in the season. If Tyreek Hill looks like he did in 2023, you have Jalen Waddle, you have Devon Achane out of the backfield. Could be a decent option, plug and play, in certain matchups. And then I have Matthew Stafford. I know there's been a lot of stuff about his back, injury risk, but I also think there's the possibility that Stafford just goes out there, even as a pocket passer, and just lights it up with a ton of passing volume, hits in the passing touchdown department, and ends up being like a quarterback 12 when we look back at this season. Kind of like what people think Jared Goff is going to be this year. Like I think Matthew Stafford could end up having very similar production. But that is going to wrap it up for my top 24, my tiers. If you missed the running backs, wide receivers yesterday, go check those out. Stay tuned for the tight ends, the overall player rankings. If you want the full rankings, the link will be in the description. Thank you all for stopping by. If you enjoyed, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe, and I will see you guys in the next one.